Hello and welcome back to another KB's yapping session. This time, instead of doing a deck profile, however, I'm going to be going over the special limited set. I think there's a lot of stuff to cover here as a product, and this is a product you definitely do not want to miss out on. Make sure that your local game store, has it in, because these cards will be mainstays in the rest of the game's lifespan, at least in my opinion. Now, what's so special about this product? It's effectively an import from some of the JP cards, primarily scrambles and some of the aces and the boosts. Also, I got a new mic, which is kind of cool, so hopefully my voice sounds a little bit better, and that'll actually incentivize me to do a little bit more videos. The Misplay for Game crew can no longer flame me for sounding like I'm constantly underwater. I already got my set, and to show off, I got the Quantum Altar, which looks really cool, and I was also very fortunate to get the Ruin mode, which is pretty sick. So I won't really do an unboxing. You can find unboxings. The product is primarily the same, and you get two sort of hits. Anyway, let's go into the actual contents of the set. So I'm going to be quickly going over some of the aces because these cards are relatively new. They have existed in Japan for a while, and some of them are more impactful than others for sure. Now, I'm going to try to give you the short and sweet of the cards just because, you can also kind of look at them and read them for yourself. The Agumon pops something that equals its DP and its Digimon worth, so essentially like you can spread out the deletion, and when attacking, if you have a tamer, you can trash one, so that's pretty handy for things like closing out games. The Gabumon lets you return two things with as many or fewer sources as this, and gives you an unconditional unsuspend as long. Well, I say unconditional, you need a blue tamer or just a tamer. The decks you're going to be playing this card in use tamers anyway, but it is a very generic card, as it contributes to blue's main game plan of source stripping, and a generic unsuspend is also pretty good as a finisher. The Sukuyamon maid mode is a little bit more specific and can do one of two things. You can either place a yellow tamer or a single color 5 cost or lower option from your hand on top of your security, so heals one on opponent's turn, which is pretty sick. And also when a security card is used or added to the security, you get to neg something by 6 KDP, so pretty useful. The Shivamon acts as both a bug mainstay as well as a Pulsemon ace, letting you, either suspend something if you're 3 or more, and then buff something by 3 KDP until end of opponent's turn, which is pretty good, or it lets you bot deck something that is suspended if you are 3 or fewer. Now, Pulsemon rule still applies, so if you're exactly 3, you get to do both effects. And for some reason, I don't know why, I wish somebody could tell me, they decided to give the Kabu protection to the Shiva ace. What I mean by Kabu protection is that as long as this card is suspended, it's not affected by your opponent's Digimon effects, which is pretty good. The Cybertramon plays tamers, and then if you have a tamer, they digivolve something, and also gives you the digivolve when attacking as an ESS. This is one of the few aces in the game that has an ESS right now in the game, and right alongside him we have the Megidramon. This card came a little bit late, but for all the people that want to play the heavy metal deck or even Gallantmon strategy, this card is pretty good. Pops in 11k or lower. Remember that with Gallantmon you can increase this threshold by quite a bit, and also when I would leave the battle area, you play Gyumon from your trash, and then you place this under that Gyumon. So effectively this card is actually a lot more sticky than some of the others, just because the opponent has to remove it twice, which is pretty good and will contribute to the card's overall success. Now, the memory boosts, they all function effectively the same, but just for different colors. So the first thing is that they only reveal 3 as opposed to the usual 4, so you're not digging as deep. However, they let you search cards of 2 different colors, so either in the case of Garnet, it would be red or black, Wisteria, it would be blue or red, Ember, it would be yellow or purple, Sepia, yellow or black, Grape, green or purple, and then Jade, blue or green. Now, the other notable thing about these cards is that the opposite color also meets color requirement for activating the card. So essentially, Garnet, as long as you have a black source, you can also use it, which is really good. The only reason this is relevant is because obviously if you're playing, say for example, like a Ragnar deck and you have a black level 4 in the back, typically you wouldn't be able to use the red memory boost, but with Garnet you can still use it. It also means that trainings are able to find their respective colors. So For something like Grape Memory Boost, this is actually highly relevant thanks to Takemi Kazuchi being the main card that will, the main deck that will use this card. But for something like Imperial, typically most of your deck is more blue than green, so it's not like you would be sort of like in a position where you wouldn't normally be able to use this card anyway. They're all pretty good, and some of them will see more play than others, but these will also become staples in the game, at least in my opinion. And I'll go over some of the decks that would like to use these boosts. Now, for Scrambles, there's a lot to talk about Scrambles, and I think it's the main sort of card that people are really excited for. Effectively, our new staple, right? You guys remember the boosts, those were staples for a while, then we got the trainings, which completely changed the way that we play Digimon. And now we're getting the Scrambles as well. And these cards do quite a lot. So to start off with, we have here, I'm just using the Blue Scramble as an example. The Blue Scramble says that one of your Digimon may digivolve into the color of, you know, that Digimon, or the color of the Scramble for a reduced cost of 3. And then you place this in the battle area. So typically this is really efficient straight away at level 5, right? So if you have a level 4, you Scramble to enter your level 5. Typically most level 5s will cost 3. So you pay the 2, reduce it by 3, effectively making your 3 cost evos all cost 2. And subsequently, your 4 cost evos now cost 3. So it basically means that any deck that would like to have like a very impactful effect, so for example like Sundrill or like Zeph that, you know, take an action after evolving, right? So like for example in this case attacking, you offset their 4 costs into 3, so they can become just so ever slightly more efficient, which is very, very nice. The other effect is at the start of the turn, so there's 2 conditions for this effect. The first effect is that if the opponent has a Digimon, you crack the delay and you put anything from the trash on top of your deck. Now this is also before draw phase, which means that it stops you decking out, which is actually pretty good. The second effect is if you don't have a Digimon, so if you don't control like any Digimon, you can then play a color corresponding Digimon from your trash with 2000 DP or less. Now the 2000 or lower DP, there's so many targets. I'm going to go over just some of the targets for each color, but it gives you effectively a little bit of comeback. So the main thing is that recycle and rebuild, right? These are the 2 R's that will make up Scramble, right? So one important aspect of Scrambles is that any card that is currently limited, you can get multiple uses out of it by using the Scramble and, you know, stacking that forbidden one of on top of your deck. So in a case of, say for example like Anubis, you'd be able to like put the Anubis on top of the deck and then you draw it for turn. Also, it's start of your turn, so this is before draw phase, so whatever you stack you can draw into, which is really, really nice. You can also do something with searchers where you can like stack your search target, play the searcher from your trash, make sure you get that piece to your hand, then you get a fresh draw for turn, so you're effectively going like +2, which is also pretty insane. The other thing that's really important about Scrambles is that they allow decks to get less punished by, I said control, but in reality I mean removal heavy decks. I'm talking things like your Gallant Mons, things like you know, your what's a good example, like most yellow decks that rely heavily on DP minus, black decks that like delete lots of things like Lavaya, you know, these decks that have a ton of removal built into them. Scrambles effectively let you get punished a little bit less, because typically against those decks you'd play this like game of chicken of like who's going to raise, but now in Scrambles you're allowed to do your proactive game plan, force the opponent to respond to you, and then you can clap back with the Scrambles, which is really, really nice. I could go on and on about how good Scrambles are for the game, but be prepared to see at least like 1 Scramble at the very least in most lists, just because the card is that good, right? And you know, over the course of the game, and with Digimon games becoming increasingly longer, you know, per match, you are more likely to see like your 1 over your 2 of Scramble. They also have a security effect, which is pretty good, just giving you a little bit of a free play from the trash, and then add themselves to hand. Now, adding themselves to hand means that something like Mirage can be a little bit of a problem. Nobody likes Mirage Galgamon BT11, but you know, this is not a video discussing that card. However, there's actually something here for the people that want like a counter to Mirage, as this card can help you counter Mirage. But yeah, having a security effect that adds cards to your hand is good and bad, but more often than not, 9 times out of 10, this card is going to be very good in security. Now, let's go over some of the individual winners of each of these cards. So starting off with the Agumon, I have here the Agumon Bond of Bravery Ace, and this is effectively a worse Crimson Mode Ace. However, it is more specific and geared towards the Agumon decks. Like any deck that plays an Agumon, expect them to maybe tech this card in. So I'm talking Agumon, Wargreymon, Omnimon, right? Now, the issue with this card is that because its deletion is based on how much DP the card has, you'd need to find ways to gain DP until end of opponent's turn to maximize the amount of deletion that this card has, as opposed to the Gallimon, which is like a flat 15, and then also has the added benefit of some of the Gallimon cards that let you increase that threshold by even more. The other issue with this card is that most red decks have a sort of target level 7, like if you think about like Omnimon, they have obviously the Omnimon, Wargreymon also has Omnimon, Jessamon has the GX, Gallantmon has a Crimson Mode, so it's going to be a little bit difficult to fit this card in, but I can think of a few decks that could maybe splash it if they so choose to. Now, onto the Gabumon Ace. So the first thing about this card is I believe that this is going to be the next generic good level 7 ace for blue, as opposed to something like Paladin. The card is a little bit more in sort of not rewarding, maybe that's not the correct word, but the card is definitely more useful a lot of the time, right? The problem with Paladin is that, like, yes, source stripping is very good, but you're not actually removing things on the opponent's turn, which is something that like you typically want out of your ace. The card just provides sort of like weird matchup value, like against something like Attack and Mika, that's when like the Paladin really shines, but this will be really good across like most of your matchups. Some of the decks that get to use this are things like Mirage. Obviously will probably play it as just sort of like a way to protect their BT11 Mirage Galgamon from battle, and also very good with like Hexablau cores. Armor, another deck that would probably want to use this as like a sort of pseudo finisher, you know, 3 memory to attack twice is pretty good. Gabumon, obviously. Fish, funnily enough, Fish has the ability to include like source strip packages into its deck, and because you have like so many guys out, there's a world where you play this Gabumon also. It means that something like the Gomamon from BT7 that, like, when you play it out to draw 2, could be replaced by something more generic as the BT1 Gabumon that just on play draws 1, so then that way you're also threatening the Gabumon on those Gabumons that you play out, right? That you're threatening the Bond Ace on the little Gabumons, which is pretty good. Amphi is another deck that could potentially play this. It's a deck that has a lot of Source Strip, and, you know, again, another finisher is pretty good. Any sort of Ice Clad, Ice Snow, you know, I called it like Hexablau, Ice Clad, Ice Snow, effectively a Scattymon, Skibbitymon, whatever you want to call it. I know people are going to call it Skibbitymon. I'm just letting you know now that Skibbitymon is how you're going to refer to it. But yeah, that is another deck that I would like to use this, since it is a deck that likes to manipulate the opponent's sources, as well as like Tommy Hybrid. Even though that deck hasn't really taken off, that would be a deck that would want to use something like this. The other great thing about the Gabumon Ace is that it is a generic 3-cost Evo that will just let you get a little bit more damage, right? Again, I don't know if I've said this before, but just to reiterate, it's a very good finisher. Sakuya. Now this card's really specific. It's really good for exactly Sakuya, any deck that would want to stack something like Revelation of Light, and any sort of like Kuzuha pile. Now, I'm distinguishing a Kuzuha pile from something like the upcoming Taumon loop, because I don't think that deck is... it's kind of like a nothing burger deck. Like, yes, it's winning, but I personally don't like it. Whereas I think something like a Kuzuha deck is just a little bit more interesting. But the card is definitely very specific, and so you probably won't see it as much. Shivamon, this card is insane for a couple of decks. Obviously, Tyrant, Pulse, those cards. This card fits into his decks very nicely. Because of the Kabu protection, this card is just so good, patches a lot of the weaknesses that Tyrant previously had. And as for Pulsemon, it gives them something to do on the opponent's side, which is pretty good considering that you have the ability to spawn out extra bodies, which is always very appreciated. Royal Base, I guess, as a green deck could maybe play this, but I don't really see it long term. I just kind of added it here just to have another example. Now, what a deck that could, or sort of like a shell of decks that could use this, are decks that play with the level 5.5 protection, so the Rapid level 5 and the Grand Gale. Now, the problem with Shivamon is that green is not shy of premier level 6 aces. We have Cherubi, Grand Kuagamon, We have Mega Gargo, right? All of these cards, even the Imperial Digimon Fighter mode, like, you know, it's still a green card, and all these cards are incredibly powerful aces that, you know, are as good, if not better, for Shiva. However, the card is specifically very good in Tyrant, and so it will definitely see a lot of play. Cybertron, I forgot to put winners at the top, but, you know, it's still a winner now. This card, I think it's a little bit ahead of its time. The card is pretty good. Will find its way into, you know, the most obvious things right now being Justimon, especially when Justimon gets its support in BT19. Super excited for that. Machine Dramon will definitely like this. You know, getting out your analogs is always very useful. Having a Digivolve at level 5 is also very useful, especially at counter timing. And counter timing the Digivolve is incredibly powerful. We know how good Vikemon Ace is and Shadow Straffi, so imagine having a level 5 that he Digivolves by 1 by just having a Tamer, which is pretty good, and also develops a Tamer. Any sort of Mother Control core will probably play this. Decks that, you know, typically are not fighting the level 5, they can kind of just threaten this on their level 4s, or just regular evolve into it, right? Since the card does the Digivolve 1 and also plays out a Black Tamer, so you get your Black Ties, your Satskis, whatever. And then Black Hybrid as a whole, I'm not super convinced by Black Hybrid. As much as I want that deck to function, it just doesn't really have the tools. And you might as well just play like a Meta Control deck and still call that effectively Black Hybrid. And D-Brigade Digipolice is something that can also play this, you know, that deck can stack its cards, it can stack your Tamers, and then you can, you know, either keep the cards on top or put them at the bottom of the deck, which is pretty nice. Like I said, a little bit ahead of its time, but will definitely find its way into places, and if you're a Justimon player, definitely pick up your copies now. For the Megidramon, this card just kind of has a little bit of potential. It's pretty good, but I could only really think of like 2 obvious decks I would want to play this, and then sort of like a third. Like, I'm adding this as a nice example. Obviously Gallantmon would like to play this, Heavy Metal Dramon would like to play this, and then technically it's a 4-grade dragon that you can technically play this in. Whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, that's up to you. Now let's go over some of the boosts. For Garnet, obviously Ragna is the, you know, cover card, so it would definitely want to use this. Millenniumon is another deck that would really like this card, since some of your better cards are the black end or the red cards that are black, so being able to find those is pretty good. Jesmon, now you have a memory boost that lets you find both your level 6s, so your Jesmons and your Gankus and your Magnas, so you have like a lot of targets to feed the GX. Machine Dramon is another deck that would like this, just because Machine Dramon typically a deck that plays pieces that are black and pieces that are red and then kind of combines them. And in the same vein, Dragon Links, you know, another deck that has black cards and red cards, even though it isn't a DNA deck, it would still appreciate Garnet Memory Boost. The main thing about the Memory Boost is that now it gives decks sort of something passive to do, like these decks like Ragna that typically, you know, ideally you're trying to climb as quickly as you can, and if you don't have any passive plays, you're kind of stuck, like if you don't have a Searcher. With this, you have 4 cards that are just, you know, like best in slot. For Wisteria, this is, I think, the most problematic of the memory boost, just because blue and red are such strong colors that should not be combined and allow for some, I wouldn't say degeneracy, but definitely oversights, right? So Omnimon is completely fair, you know, intended, but Galaxy or Lightfang Nightclaw, that deck, you know, you have your red pieces and your blue pieces and you go woo, and you go up and down and up and down. That deck is another example of a deck that can very quickly run out of passive plays to do. The deck wants to kind of like build a stack every turn, play out its Tamer, and then like maybe play out the level 4 Searcher. With this, you have effectively like 4 more cards that let you get to just about anything. The other thing that Wisteria does for Galaxy is that the level 4s can find pretty much like your whole deck minus like your 6s except for Apollo. With this, you can actually find things like your Hexablaw, your Mirages, your Ryugos. So for that, this card is going to put in a lot of work for Lightfang Nightclaw. Blue Flare is another card that, you know, will definitely use this for the most unhinged reasons, let's say. Finding the starter deck Red Greymon to get that extra security check. And not in a similar vein, but for sort of like the same purpose, Armor gets to use Wisteria. Now you might be thinking, why would I want to play Wisteria over just a regular memory boost? Wisteria finds you your level 7 in the form of Jesmon GX, which is something that we've seen Japan sort of trend towards, and also finds the Durendamon, which is effectively like a 3-cost Gaia Force for Armor. So, you know, you expect to see Wisteria in Armor. For Amber, I was kind of struggling on this one, I'm not gonna lie. Like Mastimon and Lucimon are like the obvious picks, and I guess like a Rihi Toolbox, that is a deck that can play level 6s that are either purple or yellow, but of like a single colored things like your Sendrils, your Venuses. For that, Amber Memory Boost is pretty good, and Nightmare Soldiers, although not convinced. For Jade Memory Boost, on the other hand, there's an obviously very good deck, which is Imperial, and then there's sort of a less good deck, which is Examon, and then I was really scraping the bottom of the barrel here with Nature Spirits. Nature Spirits, they're getting more green cards, and the deck is going to become sort of like primarily green with a splash of the other colors, so for that, Jade Memory Boost will probably find its way into Nature Spirits, and it also finds like some of your blue cards, which is pretty good. But I couldn't really think of any other memory boost, any other deck that would want to use this exact memory boost. Leomon doesn't really count since they don't really play the blue cards anymore. Finally, for Sepia, Numemon, Sukumon, that makes a lot of sense. And Shakumon, another deck that is black and yellow and has like, you know, its DNA pieces, would definitely appreciate playing something like a Sepia memory boost. As for Grape, I could only really think of one target, that's Fenrir, but goddamn is that a very good target. Having a card that lets you find your Kazuchis as well as being a training target is incredible, and I think it's going to be the only deck that's really going to use this card. Now, let's talk about something a little bit more exciting, which are these scramble targets. Now, for red, there's a couple of decks that will immediately like find success with the inclusion of red scrambles. I'm myself really excited, along to shoutouts to my Phoenixmon homies Omega, Dyer, and Tommy Tricks. We have been sort of like foaming and just like raging and crashing out, just like, I can't wait to get scrambles and my BT13 Biyomon, and basically like you get to effectively stack something on top of the deck, warp into a Garuda, and then draw the card that you stuck, which could be something like a Garuda X that will then get you another piece back from the trash, and you know, the card is just like so good in Phoenixmon. Or you can just get the start of main phase Biyomon, and that's still pretty good. Greymon decks get to use the start of main phase Agumon, and remember, because you're playing this at the start of the turn, it means that the card will be on the field for start of main. So in the case of Agumon, you get to stack things like your one-ofs, or pieces that you're typically missing since that deck doesn't have a ton of good card draw. And you get to sort of like rebuild again. Very good in decks like Black or Greymon, decks that like have forms of removal without having to attack, right? That's the sort of Agumon style of decks that will benefit from the red scrambles. And you know, there's plenty of great Greymon targets, like because you're evolving into it for free, you can evolve into a Greymon that plays a tie or gains a memory, or you know, develops your game plan in some capacity. Gyumon, you know, it's even on the cover, that's how good the card is for the deck. You have two amazing targets between the warp that can warp into a card that has rush, or you can warp into the Gyumon that just gains rush. There's other targets like searchers and whatnot, but these are going to be two of your most like powerful bang for your buck like targets. And then I have like you might be confused as to why I included a Shoutmon, and I might even cover that deck. But effectively, essentially there's a Shoutmon deck that gets to play all of the Shoutmons that gain rush or have rush as the source, and the idea is that because you play the old DX style of deck where you have Blitz, you can play the Shoutmon and then evolve and then blitz every single turn. You're making sort of like a DX and blitzing at your opponent, which is like very, very interesting deck. I'm really, really excited to try it, even if it's more of a fun pick. Now, for blue scrambles, I couldn't think of a good amount of targets, but goddamn are these like some of the best targets for blue scramble. Both of your Vmons, the memory reduction or the one that gains you memory when you evolve, phenomenal. The Galgamon that makes both players draw one, you know, if you weren't sick of this card already, get ready to see it even more. And also the Lunamon, which, you know, it's pretty flexible. You can either bounce yourself to gain the memory or bounce something else, or, you know, the card just will jumpstart some of your combos. It's a very neat target. Yellow targets, there's a lot of them. We have the Patamon, obviously very broken. Intended deck, Shumon and Zafagamon, which, you know, I'll talk about later. But finally, these decks get to flourish because of the existence of Scramble. Sakuyamon, you know, it's on this exact Renamon, but there's a plethora of good Renamons, and because you also have access to Biomerge, you know, you get to finally do what Sakuya does best, which is to just constantly make out stacks, trade DP minus the opponent's board, and eventually, like, win in a War of Attrition. Pulsemon, I included it here just sort of like as a fun tech. Not much to say. I mean, like, you can easily tell why Pulsemon would want a card like this. A deck doesn't necessarily have to attack. And Shine, you know, if you're willing to commit to something like the yellow base, Having the Agumon that turns your Marcuses into damage that you get for free, while also putting a piece on top, which is, you know, the deck typically struggles with recovery plays. You know, we all scramble just makes a lot of sense. Green, my favorite color, and oh boy, there are so many good targets. We have both Palmons. The start of main phase becomes incredibly more difficult for the opponent to play around, or if you're playing something like Bloom Lord, you know, getting extra copies of your Sunflowers, Agitars is just so good. Bugs also like this. Bugs is a deck that doesn't necessarily have to swing to sort of get back into the game. Terramon, obviously target deck, and Terriermon, you know, this BT17 Terriermon sees itself being played, so you get to immediately suspend one of the opponent's Digimon, which is pretty good. I included Lopmon here, and I'll explain why the Lopmon is being included, but Alliance and Virus Imperial, I'll go over the memory, I'm calling it like memory slinger scramble decks, but those decks are very, very cool with scrambles. Now for black, I don't think black is a color that like particularly cares about scrambles that much. You know, D-Brigade maybe, Diaboro probably, Ping Pong maybe, Doraemon. I think the start of main phase Doraemon will be impactful for sort of more rogue strategies like Black Blaze Lord Nightmon. Those decks will definitely care about the Doraemon, but most of the other decks, they're just kind of like cute picks, like Venmon. Venmon is gaining a lot of popularity, and that is a deck that probably wants to use Scramble. And then Justimon as well with the Monodramon could be pretty good. Finally for purple, Awuga, Wolfpack, Stupid Dog Make Me Look Bad, Lugamon, obviously very, very insane, and this applies to both like Fenrir Lugamon as well as purple base Gora. The Lugamon is just so incredibly efficient because of its start of main phase. You get to stack, like, for example, like a Daruga, you know, evolve and then taunt something. You now have like the extra memory, and you get to sort of do like the sort of like clear loop that that deck is known for, or you just OTK your opponent, which is very normal. For decks like Levia and Lord Knight, you have access to like the Labramons and the Goblimons. Having a free body that, you know, has memory underneath is very, very good. Another generically good target is the Impmon. Any purple deck that wants to play Tamers for free could potentially play this Impmon to some success. And Warmon as well, not for Imperial, or at least the Imperial that you know, but Virus Imperial. The card is very, very good for that deck. Now, playing through Floodgates with Scrambles, I can immediately two things jumped out to me, which is that decks that want to play the memory Floodgates to counter things like Mirage now have easy access to a way to counterplay, right? So a lot of the times Mirage Galgamon will cuck you is a very like yucky word, but will effectively like almost checkmate you with Mirage Galgamon against decks that have an egg that triggers a draw by, you know, meeting the condition. What if a, you know, start of turn I play out a Floodgate rookie like the Madoki Betamon, and that I'm allowed to raise and then continuing my game plan just ignoring the Mirage Galgamon? That seems pretty good to me. So make sure that if you are playing these memory Floodgates, or if you're not, make sure to include them to let you beat Mirage Galgamon in another creative way. Same thing applies to something like Binding Crush, a little more specific, but you kind of get the point, is that you can kind of stop the Binding Crush by playing like a can't play by effect Floodgate, which is pretty neat. Now, Scrambles are really cool. I think I could go on and on and on about why these cards are insane, and I was initially going to maybe go over the memory slinging, but the video's already going on to half an hour, and I want to kind of keep it that way. Maybe if you guys are interested in me covering, you know, the Scramble heavy decks like Alliance or Virus Imperial, let me know in the comments down below, and I will maybe post some gameplay regarding those. But if you have any more questions, also put them in the comment section down below. And, you know, I want to keep the discussion going. I think Scrambles are really cool, and they're going to be a mainstay of the game. I think they will contribute to more dynamic games and sort of solve the issue that people had, which is that sometimes you just get blown out, or some people are not very good at playing the game of chicken. And so with these cards, you now get to, you know, constantly interact with the opponent, which is great. With that being said, I'm going to go now, and I'll see you guys in the next one.